reviews.
Can you give us a verbal example of how E prime would compare to a normal English sentence?
Garlic smells awful. That doesn't have the is of identity in it, but it's an absolutist statement. A more operational statement is garlic smells awful to me. Because there are some people who like the smell of garlic.
So you're being clear that it's your personal observation that you're...
Yeah, and like this is a point... Okay, well, let's not say this is. Let's take a time. Behind the Green Door is a pornographic movie. That's a statement in ordinary English. In E prime it would come out, behind the green door seems like a pornographic movie to me, which is, qualifies as a scientifically valid statement unless you're lying about it to prove it, to win an argument or some trick like that. But to say it is pornographic is to imply that there's an essence of pornography in it, like the essence of Jesus Christ in the host when the cannibals have their feast every Sunday. There is no such thing as an essence of pornography, scientifically speaking, until somebody invents what I call a smutometer. And you point this at a movie or a book and it tells you how many micro chambers or micro Lovelaces of smut it has in it. You get a direct. Until you have that kind of measurement, people are just talking about their own nervous systems and thinking they're talking about the external world.
But they're not making it clear because they're using this is in a special way.
They don't realize that when they say it is a pornographic movie, they're confusing their own evaluations with what's out there. All you can say about what's out there is that the best scientific model suggests it's photons bouncing off a cloth.
How far are we required to take this in order to get the kind of clarity we're looking for? I mean, for example, you used an example where you said, the photon appears as a wave when I measure it with a certain apparatus. But you could take it even further and say the photon appeared as a wave when I measured it with what I thought was this apparatus. You know,
oh, yeah.
And go into sort of an infinite regress.
Well, yeah, Schrödinger created what's called the Schrödinger's cat problem, which goes as follows. You take a cat, you put it in a box, you put a poison gas pellet in there, and you put a radioactive element which will emit a certain amount of radiation statistically over a certain period of time. Then you close the door. You sit down, you write the equations out and solve the equations for any given time, let's say 15 minutes. And you find you get a minimum of 2 solutions. Enough radiation has been discharged to blow up the poison gas pellet, and enough hasn't been discharged yet. You always get a minimum of 2 answers. So until you open the door, the poison gas pellet has and has not exploded, and the cat is and is not dead. Once you open the door, the state vector collapses, and the cat's either dead or alive. Schrödinger invented that because, although he was one of the major creators of quantum mechanics, he was very uncomfortable with its philosophical implications. And he said, until we can answer that question, we don't know what the hell we're talking about in quantum mechanics. What, does it make sense to say the cat isn't dead or alive until we open the door? And if it doesn't, why do we use equations that imply that we can't say so until we do open the door? And since physicists have been arguing about that since 1935, when Schrödinger first published it in Der Naturwissenschaft, Volume 23, it thrilled me when I found out what the number of the issue where he published that. They've been arguing about that ever since. Meanwhile, one of my books is called Schrödinger's Cat, one of the best popularizations of quantum mechanics by John Gribben, the physics editor of New Scientist, is called In Search of Schrödinger's Cat. It really does highlight the major problem in quantum mechanics. Meanwhile, Wigner made it even worse by pointing out that after you open the door, the state vector is only collapsed for you. For another physicist in the hall outside the laboratory, the state vector doesn't collapse until you open the door and say, dead cat, well, cat's still alive. Or if you consider a physicist on a computer in London, I'm assuming we're doing the experiment here in California, the state vector doesn't collapse until the email signal arrives in London. So Wigner from this concludes that we can't separate the observer from the observation in any sense whatsoever, and every observer creates a separate universe. or has to be considered as having created a separate universe, depending on which signals they have apprehended at this point, which makes sense in terms of Buckminster Fuller's definition of universe as none simultaneously apprehended.
So in a sense, each person is carrying around their own universe.
Yeah, in a very real sense. And to repeat myself, I have done experiments hundreds of times in which I have audiences try to describe the same thing, and they all perceive it differently. And then I have them describe the hall outside the seminar room or the sounds they hear during a quiet period. I have done experiments where after they listen to the sounds and they all discover they heard different sounds, I ask them, how long did that listening experiment last? And I get estimates running from 15 seconds to 4 minutes. So we create our own time, too, which is what William Burroughs discovered in Tangier. One day he got up, had some coffee, made a little breakfast, wrote a letter, went down to American Express, mailed it, stopped at a cafe, had coffee with a friend, came home, and it was late afternoon. And Burroughs said, where did the whole day go to? He decided the short time mob had moved in. The short time mob are extraterrestrial invaders who steal our time when we're not paying attention. If you're paying attention, they can't steal your time. But if you're not paying attention, they steal a few minutes here, a few seconds there, a half hour here, and you're pretty soon with the whole day gone, you don't know what happened. The short time mob has stolen your time. So the cure is attention, which Aldous Huxley also agreed with in his novel Ireland. The enlightened ruler of this utopian island has released myna birds that fly all over the island and keep shouting, attention, 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 just so everybody doesn't lose their time and drift off.
I guess the essence of my question was, can't we get almost absurd with the level of indeterminacy we would be putting into our language? How far do you feel we really need to adjust how we're speaking in order to bypass a lot of problems?
I discovered that when I talk about uncertainty, people assume that means total uncertainty, and you can't be sure of anything. That's because of the domination of Aristotelian either-or language, true or false. If a thing isn't true or false, then you're totally lost, if you're stuck in the Aristotelian game rules. But we've got several logic based on probability theory, invented by a mathematician named Wolofsky in the 1920s. The guy who invented fuzzy logic in the 1970s, Zadov, and von Neumann suggested without probabilities, he just suggested a three-valued logic, true, false, and maybe. I have my own adaptation of Korzybski's infinite-valued logic. Korzybski calls it infinite-valued because he meant you could extend it to as many decimal points as you needed to solve a given problem. So it depends on what you're dealing with. But 1 to 10 is a good enough scale, and oddly enough, Arthur Clarke came to this opinion about the same time as me. He had a show, maybe it's still on some channel I don't get. He had a show called Mysterious Universe, in which he dealt with fringe science, scientists who get results that are rejected by the majority of the scientific community. Are they all crackpots, or do some of them have something? And he never gave a yes or no answer on any of them. He'd give a probability from 1 to 10, just like I do. You're not stuck in a void. You can make pretty good estimates. I know the sun does not come up literally, but since I don't want to be too finicky, let's just say the sun is going to come up tomorrow morning as a statement. Actually, it means the earth is going to continue revolving in a way that the sun will appear to come up in the morning. But anyway, I would set the probability of that at around 9.999 at least. If you want to go to 10 decimal places, I'll add a few more nines